we have a interesting topic. The auditing kasi. So, napaka-importante noong documentation. Yan ang evidence mo na nag-audit ka nga, ano? And if you are an auditor of an auditing firm na merong international tie-up, ano? Uy, masyadong stricto sila sa documentation. Meron silang department to review na properly documented ang trabaho ng auditor. Talagang yun ang kanilang quality control, ano? Meron silang pamantayan na dapat sundin. Now, audit documentation meaning organized into proper files yung iyong mga evidence na gather. No? Information that very important for succeeding batches of auditors to know. And these batches always looking for the prior year tawag nila doon, working papers. Working papers, no? So let us see the content of the sinabi ni Cabrera na dating board examiner at reviewer. Okay, so this evening, sino mag-o-open ng subject matter? Si Agila. Okay, so what the Cabrera saying on topic audit documentation? Okay, Jacqueline, pasimulan.
Hello po, sir.
Yan, maganda.
Good evening, everyone. Ang i-discuss ko po is about audit documentation. Ano po ba ang audit documentation? Ang audit documentation, ito yung mga record na sinusulat para maging batayan ng auditor's conclusions na nagpo-provide ng support para sa representation ng auditor na nakapaloob sa auditor's report. Introduction. PSA 230 clarified audit documentation establishes standards and provides guidance regarding audit documentation in the context of the audit of financial statements. Nilinaw ng PSA 230 na ang audit documentation ay nagtatag ng mga pamantayan at nagbibigay ng patnubay tungkol sa audit documentation sa context ng audit of financial statements. PSA 230 o Philippine Standard on Auditing deals with the auditor's responsibility para mag-prepare ng audit documentation para sa audit of financial statement. The standard on documentation requires that the auditor should prepare on a timely basis audit documentation that provides a sufficient and appropriate record of the basis for the auditor's report. Dito, sapat at naangkop na record ang batayan para sa pag-uulat ng auditor. Ang kaangkupan ng evidence is the quality ng mga evidences, kaugnayan at pagiging maasahan nito upang suportahan ang opinion ng auditor. Ang audit evidence includes ang information na provide sa books of accounts as well as information na galing sa ibang sources. For example is purchase invoice and material received note prepared by the stores department are evidence to support the purchase. And B, evidence that the audit was performed in accordance with PSAs and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Katibayan na ang ang katibayan na ang pag-audit ay sinasagawa alinsunod sa mga PSA at mga naangkop na kinakailangan sa rules and regulations. Alinsunod sa PSA 711, ang auditor ay kinakailangan na maglagay ng date sa auditor's report nang hindi mas maaga kaysa sa date kung saan ang auditor ay nakakuha ng sapat na appropriate audit evidence kung saan ibabatay ang opinyon ng auditor sa financial statement. Audit documentation means the record of audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidence obtained, and conclusions the auditor reached. Terms such as working papers or papers are also sometimes used. Ang ibig sabihin ng audit documentation, ito yung pagre-record ng mga pamamaraan ng pag-audit na isinasagawa, mga katuturang ebidensya sa pag-audit, at mga conclusion na abot ng auditor. Ang audit documentation also may be referred to as work papers or working papers. Ito din ay yung written record ng basis for the auditor's conclusions that provides the support for the auditor's representations. Audit file means one or more folders or the storage media in physical or electronic form containing the records that comprise the audit documentation for a specific engagement. Ito ay isa o higit pang mga folders o storage media in physical or electronic form na naglalaman ng mga records na bumubuo ng documents ng pag-audit para sa particular na pakikipag-ugnayan. Ang current audit file ay ginagamit para ma-maintain ang audit documentation specific a current year and would not necessarily be useful in future audits. When preparing for an audit, you need to counter check and ensure that all the transaction documents such as checkbooks, purchases invoice, sale receipts, journal vouchers, bank statements, tax returns, petty, petty cash records, and inventory records are in order. Experienced auditor means an individual, whether internal or external to the firm, who has particular audit experience and a reasonable understanding of. Ang experienced auditor, ito ay may reasonable understanding sa audit activities at mayroong kaalaman sa company's industry as well as accounting and auditing issues. Kaugnay sa industry. A reasonable understanding of audit processes. Audit processes which is to test at i-prove that processes ay nakakonduct effectively and follow due control mechanisms. Next is PSAs and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Next is the business environment in which the entity operates and auditing and financial reporting issues relevant to the entity industry. Nature of audit documentation. Audit working papers are the records kept by the auditor of the procedures applied, the test performed, the information obtained, and the pertinent conclusion reached in the engagement. They represent the documentation of audit evidences collected and evaluated. Audit working papers ay ang mga records na tinatago ng auditor ng mga inilapat na procedures, mga ginawang test, mga information na nakuha, at mga naugnay na conclusions na umabot sa pakikipag-ugnayan. Ito rin yung ginagamit para na nag-gathered during an audit. Objectives of audit documentation. The primary objectives of audit documentation are preparing sufficient and appropriate audit documentation on a timely basis to help enhance the quality of the audit and to facilitate the effective review and evaluation of the audit evidence obtained and conclusion reached before the auditor's report is finalized. Documentation prepared at the time work is performed likely to be more accurate than documentation prepared subsequently. Ito rin yung nagpa-facilitate ng planning, performance at supervision of the engagement. The other objectives of audit documentation are A. Assisting the engagement team to plan and perform the audit. Ito yung pagtulong sa mga ka-team o pakikipag-ugnayan na magplano at magsagawa ng pag-audit. B. Assisting members of the engagement team responsible for supervision to direct and supervise the audit work and to discharge their review responsibilities in accordance with PSA 220 clarified. Alinsunod sa PSA 220 na ang pagtulong sa mga kamiyembro o pakikipag-ugnayan na responsible para sa pangangasiwa o pangasiwaan ng gawaing pag-audit at upang gampanan ang kanilang responsibilidad. And C. Enabling the engagement team to be accountable for its work. Makikipag-ugnayan sa mga ka-team upang maging responsible sa trabaho at sa mga gawain nito. D. Retaining a record matters of continuing significance of future audits. Dito mahalaga ang pagpapanatili at pagpapatuloy ng records para sa future audits. E. Enabling the conduct of quality control reviews and inspections in accordance with PSQC 1 clarified. Nilinaw ng PSQC na paganahin ang pagsasagawa ng pagsusuri at inspection. F. Enabling the conduct of external inspections in accordance with applicable legal, regulatory, or other requirements. Dito naman, pinapagana o paganahin ang pagsasagawa ng mga panlabas na inspection na linsunod na naangkop sa legal, regulation at iba pang kinakailangan. Form, content, and extent of audit documentation. The auditor shall prepare audit documentation that is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection with the audit to understand A. The nature, timing, and extent of the audit procedures performed to comply with the PSAs and applicable legal regulatory requirements. Sinabi dito, ang kalikasan, timing at lawak ng pamamaraan ng pag-audit ay na isinasagawa upang sumunod sa mga PSA at naangkop na legal at regulation ng mga kinakailangan. B. The results of the audit procedures performed and the audit evidence obtained. Resulta ng mga pamamaraan at pag-audit na sinasagawa at ang nakuhang ebidensya sa pag-audit. C. Significant matter arising during the audit, the conclusion reached thereon, and significant professional judgment may be made in reaching those conclusions. During ng pag-audit, ginamit ang judgments or paghuhusga para magawa ang conclusion. Content and extent of audit documentation depend on factors such as kakomplikado ang isang entity. Pangalawa, katangian ng mga pamamaraan ng pag-audit na isasagawa. Pangatlo, mga natukoy na panganib o maling pahayag. Pang-apat, mga importance ng mga nakuwang evidence ng audit from audit procedures performed during the course of the audit. Next is pagtukoy ng mga katangian at lawak ng mga exception, the extent of professional judgment exercised in performing the work and evaluating the results. Next is ang mga kailangang i-documents ay ang isang conclusions o ang batayan para sa conclusion, which is hindi madaling matukoy na nanggaling sa mga gawain na isinasagawa o nakuhang ebidensya sa pag-audit. And lastly, mga pamamaraan ng pag-audit at mga tools na ginamit. It is, however, neither necessary nor practicable to document every matter the auditor considers during the audit. Oral explanations by the auditor on their own do not represent adequate support for the work the auditor performed and conclusions the auditor reached, but may be used to explain or clarify information contained in the audit documentations. In documenting the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures performed, the auditor shall records the identifying characteristics of the specific items or matters tested. Dito, kailangan ma-identify ang characteristic ng mga specific items o mga bagay-bagay na nasuri. B. Who performed the audit work and the date such work was completed. Kailangan nilang i-record kung sino at anong date nag-perform ng audit work or natapos. C. Who reviewed the audit work performed and the date and extent of such review. Kung sino ang nag-review ng audit work at kung kailangan at kung kailangan o ku- at kung kailan o anong date at lawak ng naturang pagsusuri. The auditor shall assemble the audit documentation in an audit file and complete the administrative process and assembling the final audit file on a timely basis after the date of the auditor's report. After the assembly of the final audit file has been completed, the auditor shall not delete or discard audit documentation of any nature before the end of its retention period. Dito, ang auditors ang nag-a-assemble ng mga audit documentation sa audit file at kumumpleto ng administrative process sa pag-assemble ng final audit file sa napapanahong batayan pagkatapos ng auditor's report. After makumpleto ang pag-assemble ng final audit, hindi pwedeng i-delete or discard ng auditor ang audit documentation ng anumang bago matapos ang panahon ng pagpapanatili nito.
Okay. So the working papers and documentation has that retention period, which vary, no? It may be 3 years, it may be 5 years. Nang nire-require ngayon ng BIR, 5 years. Pero kapag merong pending tax cases, it may be longer than 5 years, ano? So, case-to-case basis din. Pag merong mga pending, for example, tax cases and other cases, baka the retention period may go beyond 5 years until such time yung mga issues ay resolved, no? So, that is the retention period. Okay, so the opening statements were delivered, no? So we have heard the opening statements regarding the audit documentation. So now it becomes clearer to us the many purposes why there must be audit documentation. And we are realizing at this point na talagang kailangan ng maraming papel, ano? Kailangan ng maraming papel. And there is so much things to be done. Auditing lang yan, ha? Because you should accumulate sufficient, adequate, relevant uh, evidence. No? Evidence. And there are those guidelines na promulgated by the bodies, no? Regulatory bodies na dapat sundin, na dapat na-meet ang mga minimum requirements para masabi mo you have that adequate audit documentation of the audit procedures performed. No? Okay, so we move on. Try yung second reporter. Ganda pa naman ng kanyang topics. The types of the working papers. Meron tayong tinatawag na administrative file. Anong laman noon? Okay. Merong so, in auditing, meron tinatawag tayong mga supporting schedules. Ano? Yan yung mga worksheets or spreadsheets na supportive do sa mga statements na ine-claim natin or ina-assert mismo ng mga auditor. No? Okay? Supporting schedules. So there are so many files. Now, sabi nga, the papers constituting the documentation should be selected, ano? Given you have only that allotted time to be in the client, no? Okay. So, you should also be very selective na yung iyong na pick to be included in the documentation, eh, walang labis, walang kulang. So, ano makikita dyan sa documentation? The audit programs. Ano ba yung audit program? Yan yung mga procedures na dapat i-perform. Mga trial balance, ano? Mga lead schedules or top schedules. Ano ba yung mga lead or top schedules? Yung ano, para yung ano menu. Yan yung mga nasa taas, no? Na indicate your choice or selection, pupunta na doon sa mga supporting schedules, ano? At doon din makikita yung mga summary of adjusting and reclassifying entries na pinopropose ng auditor. Ang mga audit notes or memoranda. Okay. Now, of course, we are doing working papers to constitute audit documentation for the purpose of coming up with the audited financial statements. So there must be very clear relationships between the working papers that you are preparing and your objective to come up with the every page constituting the financial statements. Okay, so we move on to, so meron yung tinatawag na current file, the contents of which is good only for the current year. But there are some pages that should be carried forward to the coming audit years or working papers that must be forwarded to the permanent file, ika nga. Permanent file consisting of papers that must be referred to repeatedly by the succeeding auditors. Alam naman natin sa audit of financial statements, annually yan, no? Annually. So there is a permanent file. Okay, so we go to the report of Perez, and let us see the topics assigned to him.
Hello po, sir.
Oo.
Ay na. Hello po, sir. Dinig po ako.
Oo. Direct.
Kita na po yung
Yes. Oo. Clear.
good afternoon, everyone. I'm the reporter for pages 812 to 814 in auditing. So, number 5, audit notes or memoranda and documentation of corroborating information. Audit notes. Audit notes, this is the working paper used to note items of work to be done that cannot be completed by following the usual sequence of audit procedures. This is also used to record questions concerning the audit investigation. So dito sa audit notes, dito ginajot down yung mga errors, mga doubtful queries, mga difficulties during an audit process. So yung purpose ng audit notes ay um, pinopoint ito yung mga various points which need to be clarified with the client or the chief auditor. So sabi nga dito, nire-record din dito yung mga questions regarding sa audit investigation. Next is outside documentation. Much of the content of the working paper consists of the outside documentation gathered by auditors, such as confirmation replies and copies of client agreements. They are indexed and interfiled, and procedures are indicated on them in the same manner as on the order schedule. So, yung mga outside documentation, yung much ng nilalaman ng working paper na to ay yung mga, yun nga, confirmation replies and copies of client agreements ng mga auditors. So, yung confirmation replies, ito yung halimbawa na minsan sa email, ganun. Tapos yung mga copies of client agreements, yung mga kopya ng agreement between the auditor and the clients. Next is relationship of working papers to financial statements. Figure 21.1 shows an illustration of the relationship between an account, cash on hand and in bank, as eventually reflected in the financial statements and the working papers that support its analysis and reflect the work performed by the auditor. So mamaya makikita niyo yung figure 21.1. And next is working paper files. Each CPA firm establishes its own approach to preparing and organizing working papers, and the beginning auditor must adopt his or her firm's approach. So yung working paper files naman, ito yung mga records na kept by the auditor. Tapos yung mga informations na nakalagay dito ay yung mga test na pinerform, yung mga information na na-obtain, at yung mga pertinent conclusions na na-reach ng isang engagement. So, sabi rin dito na bawat certified public accountant firm, sila yung nag-establish at nagsasagawa, naghahanda ng mga working papers. At yung mga auditor naman, mga beginning auditor, ay i-adopt yung um, mga approach na ginawa ng isang CPA firm. So next is figure 21.2 illustrates the contents and the organization of a typical set of working papers. In this illustration, the working papers start with more general information such as corporate data in the permanent files and end with the financial statements and audit report. In between are the working papers evidencing and supporting the auditor's tests. So ito yung figure 21.1. As you can see, it is the relationship of working papers to financial statements. So, financial statements, ex-corporation statement of financial position, December 31, 2013, assets, cash on hand and in banks, marketable securities at cost, estimated market value. So, yung working trial balance naman, ex-corporation, working trial balance, December 31, 2013. So, yan, reference for working papers, per ledger, net adjustment, and as adjusted. Assets, cash on hand, and in banks. Next naman yung lead schedule. Kagaya nga na sinabi ni Sir kanina, yung mga schedule, ito yung summary siya ng isang um, financial position. So, X Corporation, cash on hand in bank, December 31, 2013, reference for working paper per ledger, net adjustments, and as adjusted. So, in assets, petty cash fund, equitable PCI bank current, equitable PCI bank savings, and the total. So, yung next naman, supporting schedule, ito naman yung mga detailed itemization ng mga accounts. So, ex-corporation reconciliation statement, equitable PCI Bank, current December 31, 2013, balance per ledger, add deduct reconciling items, proceeds from bank loan, and net adjustment balance as adjusted. Next figure naman, yung figure 21.2, yung current file, yun lalaman ng current file, work papers applicable exclusively to current period under audit. So makikita nyo yung financial statement and audit report, working trial balance, adjusting or reclassifying, journal entries, legal entries, contingent liabilities, yan mga familiar tayo. Tapos client representation letter, ito yung mga letters na mahalaga yung pirma, dito nyo makikita yun. Then, operations, assets, liabilities, and equity, analytical procedures, yung mga procedures na ginawa, and tests of transaction, internal control structure, general information, and audit program. So, there are two main divisions of audit working papers. These are the current audit file and the permanent file. In current audit file, the current year working paper file is designed to support the assertion embodied in the financial statements. The financial statements shown at the top of figure 21.2 are supported by the working trial balance, which shows the proposed adjustments and reclassification. Each account on the working trial balance is supported by lead and supporting schedules. Kagaya na sabi ko kanina, yung lead schedule kanina ay yung summary sa taas and yung supporting schedules naman yung detailed itemization ng mga account. Ito. Yan. This file contains all papers accumulated during the current year's examination. The working papers normally included in the current file are original draft of the report and um, in A, the financial statement, B, draft of the auditor's report. So yung current audit file, gaya rin ng sinabi ni Sir kanina, ito lang yung mga file na makikita mo within the current period ng isang, halimbawa ng isang engagement. Current audit files contain information that relates to a specific audit engagement. Therefore, they will include information such as current year adjustments, yung mga working papers, significant audit findings, and audit evidence. So, ayun po. Pahapayawan ko na lang yung permanent file. Yung permanent file naman, ito yung pang long term. Permanent files do not relate to a specific period or engagement. Therefore, yung mga content na naka-include dito ay yung mga engagement letters, client questionnaires, memorandum and articles, long-term contracts, shareholder agreements, and board meeting minutes. That's all po. Thank you po.
Basta yun? Okay.
Okay.
Maiksi pala, no? So, you can see na, no, na merong organization yung documentation, no? Kanya-kanyang auditing firm, halos pareho naman, ano? Halos pareho. Okay? Kakaiba lang marahil yung mga tick marks na ginagamit. Kung anong ibig sabihin ng each and every tick mark na ginagamit ng auditor. A tick mark representing what audit procedure ang ginawa. For example, uh, confirmation ng balances with the creditors, with the debtors, no? Naka may tick mark corresponding to that audit procedure. So we are exploring what audit documentation in detail means, ano? Now we are seeing na mayroong mga permanent file and there are materials na for current file. Meron pa yung mga tax file, ika nga, no? Tax file. Now, just imagine during when I was an auditor then doing field work together with the staff, together with the more senior than I was, no, uh, examining the current year, gaano kakapal yung isang folder, minsan 2 inches thick ang isang folder, ay na naman folder, minsan tatlo, no, ang kapal noon. And how many audit staff performing? Parang dalawa lang. Oo. Now, it is not required na maging CPA ka to be an audit staff, ano? In an auditing firm. Pwede yung underboard to be an audit staff, ano? Uh, Siyempre, magaganda ang grades mo, no? Okay. Yun. Um, saka, so, basically, yun, no? Audit staff. At hindi ka mawawala ng work, ano? Kulang pa yung time available para matapos mo yung mga dapat gawin para to come up with adequate, sufficient audit documentation. Okay, so we go to the uh, other reporter. This time, Tarsuela, are you ready? Now, we want to see
Yes,
the audit procedures this time, no? Because we mentioned internal control of the client. Paano i-audit yan? Di ba makita natin yung mga audit procedures to perform, to address yung issue na-audit nga ba? So, let us see from Salzuela, the audit procedures na ginagawa ng auditor. Okay.
hello po, good afternoon po.
Pwede palaki-lakihan mo para mas clearer.
Hello po, good afternoon po. Okay na po.
Di, sobra yan, sobra.
Ito po.
Kaunti pa. Sige pa. Yan, marahil. Okay na. Yan.
Sige po. Good afternoon po. So I will be reporting Chapter 19, which is also part of Test of Control. So as a review, we all know that Test of Control is the audit procedure to test the effectiveness of control used by client. So assigned to me are the inventory warehouse transactions. So when we say inventory warehouse transactions, ang element of work that takes place in a distribution center. So nandito po yung receiving, storing, and tracking of inventories in a warehouse. In representing that the financial statements are presented fairly in conformity and applicable po sa mga financial reporting framework, management implicitly, explicitly makes assertions regarding the recognition, the measurement, presentation, and disclosure of various elements. So, bali po, nakakategorize na ang financial statements assertion such as existence, occurrence, completeness, rights and obligations, valuation and measurements, presentation and disclosure. And explain ko po one by one as I go along with my report. So let's start. Here are the assertions and controls, and then these are the potential misstatements. When we say potential misstatement, it may occur when kung hindi po effective yung mga assertions and controls dito. And then, the audit procedures, ito po yung mga procedures which the auditors may make out of these controls. First is the existence and occurrence. Recorded inventory warehousing transactions occurred. Meaning to say, yung asset at liability ng isang company ay dapat nag-e-exist at a given date, and recorded transactions have occurred during a given period. Number one, a copy of a receiving report signed by a receiving clerk is used by inventory accounting to record receipt of goods. When we say receiving report, ito yung mga ito yung mga documents na ginagamit ng company to record goods and material received from suppliers during deliveries. So dito, ano ba yung mga potential misstatement that might happen? First is fictitious receipts may be recorded. So meaning to say, pwede po na ma-record yung mga hindi totoo or unreal receipts. So ano po yung dapat gawin ng isang auditor? Auditor must observe separation of duties. Each officer must be independent, meaning to say, walang sino man po ang dapat na nagkakaroon, no one person has sole control over the lifespan of a transaction. Meaning to say, hindi iisang tao lang yung gagawa. Dapat po nakaseparate yung mga duties. For example, si receiving clerk, siya yung magre-receive, so dapat i-check niya kung ano yung mga items na dumating, and then saka po niya ipapasa ito sa payable, for example sa payable staff, to record naman the receipt of goods. And then the next one is a materials requisition is prepared and signed by appropriate operating personnel. When we say materials requisitions, these are the documents used by production department to request materials they need to complete a manufacturing process. For example, in a company, si production department po, kailangan niya ng mga materials. So, magpo-provide siya at magpe-prepare ng material requisition. So, kagaya rin po nung una, ang pwedeng mangyari dito ay hindi totoo yung mga na-record na transaction. And same, observe separation of duties and examine approval signature on materials requisition. Then the next one is completeness. All inventory warehousing transactions that occurred are recorded. Inventory reported on the balance sheet includes all inventory transactions that have occurred during the accounting period. So dito dapat naka-record lahat ng transaksyon ng inventory. Receiving reports and materials requisitions are pre-numbered and accounted for by a clerk in inventory accounting. So ang potential misstatement that might occur, goods may be received or issued but not recorded. So may mga goods na na-receive na pero hindi siya nare-record. Dito, an auditor must observe procedure and account for a numerical sequence of receiving reports to determine that all have been recorded. So dapat na-oobserbahan kung ano yung procedure na meron yung client. Next, all inventory clerks sign a copy of the receiving report after counting goods transferred to his or her area. Here, errors may be recorded in the quantity of goods transferred. So ang test of control that auditor must do is to observe again the procedure and examine signature on receiving reports. And then the fifth one is to access to inventory is limited to personnel responsible for its custody. same po dito sa number 3, goods may be issued pero hindi po siya nare-record. And ang kailangan gawin ulit dito ay obserbahan yung procedure ng client. And then the next assertions is the right and obligations. Inventory warehousing transactions are for goods that belong to the entity. So dapat at the time of the reporting period, dapat po yung mga assets and liability ay rights and obligation ay pagmamay-ari ba talaga ng company. Kasi meron po tayong tinatawag na consignment. When we say consignment, it is the arrangement between a reseller or what we call the consignee and supplier, the consignor, that allows reseller to pay their products after the products has been sold. For example, ako po si supplier, nagkaroon ako ng agreement sa reseller na ibibigay ko sa kanya yung mga items pero babayaran niya lang sa akin yun kapag naibenta na niya. So dito po, goods received on consignment are labeled and separated from the goods the entity owns. So ang potential misstatement, goods on consignment may be treated as inventory. Kasi kunyari, nabenta na niya, so dapat hindi na siya maipasok sa inventory. So, the test of control that auditor must do is to inquire about and observe the procedure. When we say to inquire, ang ginagawa dito ng auditor, syempre, is to ask the clients to explain their control processes and observe business processes or transaction while it's happening, and also to take down notes of all the relevant control elements. And then the next one is the valuation or measurement. Inventory warehousing transaction are recorded for the proper amounts. So dito po, dapat, 'di ba may rule po tayo na sinusunod na dapat ang inventory valuation ay measured at the lower cost and net realizable value. So, costs assigned to work in process and finished goods are set by procedures that are reviewed and periodically evaluated. Mathematical accuracy is tested. And the potential misstatements that might occur, inventory may be misvalued. The auditor must inquire about and observe evidence of standard setting, review of standards, and testing of standard. Meaning to say, as auditor, they must need to confirm that the client correctly follows to the above rule. So dapat naka-follow sila na nababalyo ng maayos yung mga inventory. Make sure that the cost of the obsolete inventory is written down to market value, if any. And then the last one is the presentation and disclosure. Inventory warehousing transactions are recorded to result in presentation and disclosure in accordance with PFRS. The assertion and controls chart of accounts adequately describes accounts to be used, and account coding is assigned by one person and checked by another. So dito po, potential misstatements that might occur is the receipt or issue may be charged or credited to wrong accounts. The test of control is to examine chart of accounts, examine signature of employee performance check. So, yun nga po yung parang na-discuss ni Sir dati na as auditor, dapat i-check natin yung mga chart of accounts ng client ng magiging client. So, sa all in all po, in an inventory, existence evaluations are our primary concerns that we need to pay close attention. Kasi dito po pwedeng magkaroon ng overstatement of inventory na magkukos sa understatement of cost of goods sold, which makes the net profit uh, look higher than it actually is. So dito nagkakaroon po ng mga na i-state na mataas na yung profit pero hindi naman pala. So dapat po talaga na nabibigyang pansin yung pag-audit ng inventory. Yun lang po, thank you po.
Okay. So, very nice topic. And at this point, you are learning some of the audit procedures that the auditor must perform, uh, examining the controls. Now you are seeing the how the controls related to the inventory management by the client. Huh? Okay, so don't have any more reporter this evening. Any comment? Any reaction from the audience? Okay, open your camera as usual for the screenshot portion of our meeting this evening. Uh, so, mga good looking pa rin. Tayong lahat. Kasali na rin ako, no? Okay. Sino ang ating photographer nasaan? Hindi ko makita. Oh, nawala. Ah, si Nosidan. Oo. Bakit? Nosidan ba nga? Ano ba ito? Auditing. Auditing. Si ano pala, si Ray pala ang ating photographer this evening. Oo. Siguraduhin mo lang maganda yung mga shots namin, ha? Okay. So we leave our good-looking smiles for the times that we will be leaving behind. No. Okay. Another session of you come and we will uh, yo our smiles. Ah, okay. Ang ganda ng mga smiles nyo ah. Pati sa akin maganda rin. Okay, class. Assure na yun, no? Pumunta na yun sa ano, cellphone. Nasaan pa na, Ray? O, hindi. Magre-register na yun. Tagal lang net. Kung hintayin ko pa net. Ayun. Maganda ba ang ating ano? Okay. Very nice. Okay, class. Bye-bye. Till we meet again tomorrow.
Po, sir.
Thank you po, sir.
Thank you po, sir.